Welcome back. I thought first I'd talk about the hacking side of the family. My name is Dennis Hacking, obviously. My father's name is J. Farron Hacking. The J stands for Joseph Farron Hacking. His father's name was Joseph Pearson Hacking, and his father's name was John Sampson Hacking, and Joseph Pearson Hacking's mother was named Jane Clark. Now, these are my great-grandparents on my Hacking side. I'm going to tell you a little bit about John Sampson Hacking. The information that I get about from John Sampson Hacking and his wife Jane Clark come from a number of publications that I made copies of from Grandpa Farron and Ammer. And these are bulletins that were issued, most of them in the 1950s. I don't have a copy of all of the bulletins, but I have quite a number of them. And from these bulletins, I've extracted these few stories. Now, I'm not going to tell you all of the stories about these ancestors, but I've just picked one or two in order to make it interesting. John Sampson was born in England. He was actually born in 1835 in Preston, England. Now, I'll tell you just a little bit about his ancestral line. We know that his father's name was James, and James Hacking's father's name was also James. Now, that's as far as I know about the Hacking line. As far back as we can go, that puts us back into the end of about the middle of the 1700s. My dad told me, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he told me that the original James Hacking, or the oldest one we know about, he came into an area by Preston called Burton, and there he married a lady by the name of Anne. And because he married beneath himself, his mother disowned him, and therefore he did not ever have any connection with his family. Now, I don't know if that story is true, but at least it might partially explain why we're not able to trace his genealogy back any further. I think actually what happened is that he moved into this community at the same time that he married his wife, and therefore he was actually born and christened in another part of England, and we just don't know exactly where that was. The second James Hacking, James Jr., or John Sampson's father, he was born and he was a cabinet maker. He had a good friend by the name of James Clark. So we got two James Hacking and James Clark. They were good buddies, and they met a couple of girls in the neighborhood. They were two sisters. They were the Pearson girls, and they decided to start going out with them and dating them. And on one of their dates, they decided that they would trade dates. Well, it turned out that this made the match perfect for both of them, and each of these James married these two sisters. The one that James married that's in our family is Jane Pearson. We're going to hear more about her later. James, the cabinet maker, he was approximately about 40 years old when he heard the Mormon missionaries. Now, the Mormon missionaries, the first country they went to across the ocean was to England, and they went into, right quickly, they went into the area of Preston and a number of other areas close by, because there was a lot of poor people that were working in all of these factories. Preston had a lot of textile mills. They would ship the cotton in from the Americas or other colonies of England, and here the cotton was brought in, and then it was woven into cloth in these textile mills. But the people who worked in these factories were very poor people, and the owners of the factories, I think, took a great deal of advantage of them. They worked long hours, they worked hard hours, and many of the children worked. But James Hacking, when he was about 40 years old, returning home from work one day, he went by a house where the Mormon missionaries were preaching, and he stood by the open window and listened to their message. He was quite impressed, and he commented to those around him that it sounded good to him. But unfortunately, he did not live long enough to join the church. He became ill and passed away at a very young age of about 41 years old. And when he passed away, he left a widow, Jane Clark, and he left 4 little children, the youngest of which was John Sampson Hacking. He was only 4 years old when his father passed away. Now he left a small inheritance, but that money could not be claimed until the oldest son was 21 years old or had come of age. So in reality, the family was broke, they were destitute, and they were near to starvation. A year later, Jane Hacking married Mr. Fisher. And Mr. Fisher was a weaver by trade, and he was also not too well off. He also was a very poor man. He had some debts, and he was taken and thrown into debtor's prison. Now, that's the way they did it in England in those days. If you couldn't pay your bills or your debts, they locked you up in jail. And they made you go out and break up rocks that were used in the roads. Now, not only did he have to go to prison, but they also took his boys. And so John Sampson Hacking went to debtor's prison along with his stepdad. And fortunately, they found out later that they were placed in a debtor's prison that didn't belong to their community, and so they were released. Now, Mr. Fisher worked as a weaver and was able to provide meager means for the family. John Sampson went to work winding bobbins for his stepfather when he was 6 years old. And when he was 7 years old, he went to work full-time in the textile mills. When I say full-time, these children probably work more hours than what adults do today. I think they typically work 12 to 14-hour days. A lot of the adults work 16-hour days. And they worked, the children only worked, I think, 5.5 days per week. They were basically let free on noon on Saturday, whereas a lot of the adults worked 6 full days. Just one story. When James was about 12 years old, and on his way to work one day, it was a cold, wintry morning, and there was a little bit of ice on the creeks and ponds, but he happened upon a scene where a young girl had fallen through the ice and was drowning. He rushed down and he saved her. He actually got in the water, went to her, pulled her out, and got her home to a house nearby where they could take care of her, and then he ran to work. Because in those days, if you were late for work, they would lock the gate, and if you weren't inside, you basically lost your job. You lost your job, and you didn't get paid. Well, because he was soaking wet, and the manager saw his condition, he had a touch of mercy, and he allowed John Sampson to come in and stand by the boiler and dry himself out. So he did not lose his job. On his way home that night, he went by the house where the young girl lived to see if she was all right. The mother was delighted to see him come by and thanked him so kindly for what he had done earlier that day. Now, as an act of gratitude, she gave him some bread and had spread some butter on it. And he made the comment he had never seen so thick butter on the bread, because in their house, because they were poor, the mother would take and spread the butter on the bread, and then she would scrape it off, leaving behind only a small taste of the butter. But at this day, the lady gave him a big piece of bread with thick butter on it, and he said it tasted like heaven. Now, I won't tell any more stories about his youth, but on the next chapter, so to speak, and here's the symbol that I'll make another pause, we'll then talk about how this family leaves England and makes it to the American continent. So we'll talk to you later.